Well, hey there, and welcome to Home Alive, kicking off a special week of Homa talent for you this week, starting today with Katia. We'll get onto that in just a moment, but yeah, we have a stream tomorrow at this time and on Friday, so be sure to join us then, where we'll be joined with the publishing managers, going over some games and giving you hints and tips about hyper casual and for the jam specifically as well. So be sure to hit the subscribe button, all that kind of stuff, just so you don't forget to remember, I should say. A little bit of housekeeping just before we start today. If you didn't see over on the Discord or get an email from us, I've made myself available for one-on-one consultations for the jam. So do be sure to head on over to the Discord where you'll see a link to my calendar to book a session. If you've got any questions you want to ask, a little bit of hints or tips about your game, we can figure out what you're stuck on, but we really want to see your submission. So I'm here now to help you get you a little bit further. Good to see everybody in the chat there. What is up, everybody? And without further ado, I'm going to welcome my guest on today. We're going to talk all about videos. So without delay, welcome Katia to the stream. How you doing?
Hi, good thanks. How are you?
I'm very well today, thank you for asking. Yeah, so really excited about this one. I had a sneak peek at the slides and you've packed a lot of stuff in, so really pumped to see what you've got going on for us today. But before we go any further, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what your job here is at Homa.
Cool. Well, hey everyone. Thank you for joining. My name's Katia. I've been at Homa for a little over a year and a bit, doing video ads specifically. I was a motion designer beforehand. I worked in the States. I worked for companies like Planet Hollywood, Primart, big names, doing lots of pretty visuals. But yeah, and then before that, I was, believe it or not, an art historian for
Wow.
several years. Yeah. But it really does help me to create really good or focus on the messaging of videos, which is what I'm going to be talking about today.
Perfect. Yeah, and a wealth of experience there that you're bringing to the team. And like I said, I've seen a little bit of what you're going to present to us today. And I think it's really important this one because we've been talking about a lot about the video ads, and often when we're thinking about prototypes, we want to be thinking of the video right from the start to think, how am I going to present this game to the world? What are they going to see? But without going too far into it, I think I'm just going to hand over to you now and we'll see the first section of your presentation and then we'll come back on for a little bit of a chat afterwards. Sound good?
Excellent. Cool. All right. Hello, hello. So today I'll be sharing with you best practices from the creative team at Homa. And we're going to start with, first of all, just a few terminologies that we use that you might hear today. So raw recordings are basically straight recordings that we do from the game, what you see in Unity or on your mobile. And then creatives is what we refer to as the video as itself. So any manipulation that you do to your recording is what we would end up calling a creative. And that's what gets tested on the networks. And most importantly, you're going to hear me say viewer a lot because the biggest difference is we are trying to make the viewer or attract the viewer to become a player. Unlike making prototypes, you've already acquired the player and you're trying to get them to play longer. Here, we're trying to get to convert the viewer into a player. And we basically only have 3 seconds to do this on a video ad. And the best way is to have simple and clear gameplay, which is the first part I'm going to talk to the first part I'm going to talk to you guys about today. So, some of the gameplay that we're going to talk about is storyline sequence fails in Juiciness. So, what do we mean by storyline? So, culturally speaking, our visual language understands a character, a conflict, and a resolution. That's the sort of basic messaging that we all understand. So, how does this translate in gameplay? So we all have characters, whether we have an actual character, a stickman, or a skinned character, or we have a little machine, or even hands at the front of the screen. That's a character itself. And then we have gameplay. So what does the character do? The actions, the mechanics. Is it a runner? Does he go through gates? Does he have collectibles? Is it, serving burgers? There's an action and an obstacle. And the resolution of this is the achievement, finishing the level, showing progression. And this is your sort of basic message and storyline in a recording. So a concrete example of this, for example, is for ground digger. Sorry. We start off with this little digger. So that's a little character. And in the first couple of seconds, he digs and it picks up, sorry, a couple of gems. It cuts to a scene of the upgrade. So we immediately understand that collecting gems gets you an upgrade, and you get this big, massive digger. Then you see this massive digger go through the level, collecting heaps of gems, like ripping through the level, really satisfying to watch. And then it cuts to another scene where we're getting, instead of an upgrade, we're collecting or choosing to upgrade to mini bots. And then the next final scene is the mini bots helping the digger get gems and dig through the level. What we're doing here is we're showing a very, again, simple, clear objective. You have the character going through actions and getting rewards. But what we're showing through this recording is we're showing the viewer two choices and projecting the viewer in the game, because you have either the upgrade to a bigger digger or the mini bots. So by projecting the viewer into the choices, you're getting that hook of that viewer into thinking, oh, well, if I was playing this game, I would actually choose the mini bots, or I would choose the big digger. So that's our first example. Our second example here is Aquarium Land. So here we kind of manipulated the sequence of actions to attract the viewer. So our basic character is jumping into the water, catching fish, and then putting it into the aquarium, which got us 63 cents, which is okay for an idle arcade game. But then we manipulated and showed the character first collecting the money. So straight away, the viewer is intrigued. Oh, he's collecting money in an aquarium. This is really interesting. How is he doing it? And then you answer that by the next couple of seconds with the character jumping into the water, catching the dolphin, and putting it into the aquarium. Another way of helping the storyline is adding intros. 3 or 4 second animations, sometimes even less, to help like bring context and establish the storyline. For example, in Z-Raft, we had added this helicopter that crashes, and you see a little character, which is you, as the viewer or the player potentially, and then you play the game and you see the gameplay. And Get Lucky, it was showing sort of the end result. If you if you finish the level, you get the guy at the end. And in Monster Egg, it was showing how we start with the egg. So we had this great recording that worked, but then we changed the intro on how you get there. How do we get this egg in the first place? And immediately the viewer is then invested in this story, if you want, and wants to continue watching and potentially play the game. So another way we can get great recordings, as we discussed earlier, we discussed sort of the reward aspect. And the way we can change and manipulate that storyline is actually, instead of having a reward, we have fails. And this tends to work really well. Doesn't work for all games, but it's definitely worth testing. And like Alwyn and Arthur said in their presentations, work in your prototypes, like work on the fails, because they most likely will work on creatives. So for example, here, this is sort of like what we call the knob fail, which is a very sort of easy, obvious, why is this character not collecting money and going on the red strip here and failing? Immediately, what you're doing is you're projecting the viewer into the ad, thinking, oh, well, I would never make that choice. And therefore, they're already like kind of playing the game. In investment runs, so in running games, this tends to be a very common one that has been used, which is gate choices. So what you're showing here Again, going back to the very simple, clear gameplay, our top creative ended up being this choice between landline and cell phones. Now, I know that's like super obvious, but the more obvious something is, the better it is. It's simple, it's clear, you understand immediately. The viewer doesn't actually have to think about, oh, well, I would actually choose land. No, no one chooses landline. So, but because we're choosing the wrong gate choice in this aspect, again, we're manipulating the viewer to thinking, oh, well, if I was playing this game, I would not choose landline. That's such a really knob choice to make. We then tested a lot of other gate choices like Netflix and Blockbuster, or more technologies like, do you want headphones or do you want the earplugs? Now, this more brings more into like a morale kind of like personal choice. They didn't do so well. But another one that did really well was salad and burger. Again, super obvious choice. Maybe you would choose salad, but maybe you would choose burger. But either way, by choosing the wrong gate choice, you're really projecting the viewer into the game. Another type of fail is the too hard. So this game is too hard. You're not smart enough to play this game. Merge Master did this really well. With This is more of a numbers game, where the obvious choice was to, oh, well, you make connections and you make more connections to beat the boss. But again, as a viewer, you're saying, oh, well, I'm more intelligent, I can make this choice. And so you're projecting again the viewer into the game, and to hopefully click and download the game and make those choices themselves. And our last slide for this section is Juiciness, which I know Elwin and Arthur already talked about. So this sort of mixes our next section, which is about visuals. It's a bit of both, but it's mainly to do, it's in the gameplay, because it can change the way you do your fails or your upgrades. But definitely adding juiciness to these types of gameplay. So like collecting, when you're collecting, make it a little bit more physical, make it so it feels really high, that or that he's collecting a lot, that it falls over. Or when he's collecting something, it doesn't just at a linear type motion just pop onto the back, but there's a type of motion, there's a type of scale. VFX is a big one, adding, sort of these light, text, sparkles, sound effects are a big one. Definitely recommend adding sound effects to these. But also when you fail, like, don't have the character just plop down. Having the character fall, break, have an effect. This is visually impactful and enticing, because remember, these ads are being viewed, again, like I said, 3 seconds. You want to entice the viewer thinking, wow, this is really cool, I like this effect, to then press that button and download your game. So this is the end of this section.
Amazing. So yeah, I love the idea of storyline, and I'm not sure too many people will really think about that in terms of how do you introduce your game in a compelling way that really engages the audience in like a split second. And the best one there really was the egg one. Because like you got the big meme creature. I always forget that stupid name. Poppy or whatever it was, hatching that egg, and it's just like, what is going on there? And then you see the gameplay, and you're immediately invested in watching it. I think that's what you said. And I think the other one there is the two versions of the fail states, where you've got the one where it's so obvious which one you should go for, and I like the burger and the salad and the phone and the landline examples there. And I think a lot of the time, throughout these talks, we've been talking about relatable, and I think that's such a good example. It's like, oh, would I be picking up a burger the size of my head? Of course not. But the relatable thing is it good or bad, or is it is it a mobile or a landline? And I think that's really cool. The last point now, I'm just going to flick back to that last slide if I can here, to talk a little bit about this juiciness, because I think this is really important, and it's something that um, Arthur mentioned a lot, where it's like it's so important not to overdo this, and yet by not having it, you're doing yourself a real disservice. So, is there any sort of rules you can give us here about what's too much, or what's a quick win we can sort of go by in terms of how much to put on, and like what would be too much? I guess I'm asking.
Yeah, definitely. That's super important, actually. I'm glad you asked that because basically what I when we go through like creative brainstorms with the devs and stuff like that, something I always try to remember is, does it help with the readability of what's going on? So if I'm failing, does the effects that I add help, or does it help me visually understand what's going on? So if I'm dying and someone's come up with this idea of creating a big hole and the character falls in and stuff like that, do I understand that I've actually lost that level, or is it complicating my real ability? And am I asking myself, well, where's this character going? In that case, then I would say the visual effects is too much and it doesn't help with the readability. But if, for example, I'm getting a huge upgrade and I'm adding some sparkles and make it green, for example, like we see in Investment Run, where he gains, it's all green, then it's helping me understand that he's gaining something and not losing something.
Got yeah, and I think there on the drill one, especially with that upgrading of the drill on, it's kind of working as a storyline as well, because you can see the progression within the game, and you immediately know, okay, I'll start off with a little one, and I can build it up. And I think that's super important, and really like that is like it's really hooky because I can see that I start small, and the game essentially upgrades me. I
Yeah.
think that's an important point too, and you definitely answered my question. Is like when is it too much? And it's just like it's too much if all your effects are drowning out the message you're wanting to portray. So if you cover your entire screen with so many effects, so to speak, like it's just one big explosion, then you've probably overdone it. But it's kind of good to make it juicy and ham it up a little bit. Just make sure it's appropriate, I guess, to in
And
terms of the game. Sure, go ahead.
yeah, it's got to enhance the readability, and like, and it's something that something that's it's so obvious, but making it something obvious means that the person doesn't have to think. We want the viewer not to think about what they're actually watching. We want them to sit there and enjoy and not question like, what is that, or that character looks weird. That environment doesn't suit that context. We don't want them to think. We want them just to watch and enjoy. That's why, like, for example, putting in satisfactory type of effects, like going through that level when you've got a huge digger, it's very satisfying. Or having effects or collecting lots of things. All that is very satisfying to a viewer, and that's what you want to add in those videos.
Yeah, I think I'm really pleased that you said that again, because I kind of wanted to pick up on that point and I kind of forgot. It's the fact that when we see these adverts, we don't want to think. And that is such a good way of putting it. It's just like we should get it immediately, and even
Yeah.
though it could be like random and slightly obscure, you understand immediately this relatable thing. But when we see the ad, we know what's happening, even though it could be, like I said, a little bit wonky because it's a game, right? But we don't want to think. We should instantly get it and instantly realize what's happening. I think that's. I'm really pleased you reiterated that for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we should pass you back to your next section if that's okay, and I shall do that now
Yeah.
for you.
Cool. All right. So another way of helping the viewer with getting into the video, making it simple and clear, is the visual aspects. And here, there's a lot of features. I'm only going to go through a couple. And again, you can do a lot of tests in this sort of department. But here are some of the learnings that we've developed over at Homa. So one of the things is camera angle. We often just use the default camera that is on top of the character behind usually. And here, so for uh, Dining Legend. Whew, had a bit of blank there. Dining Legend. We had this. We figured out what sequence was the most interesting, which was two customers come in. He picks up the order. He makes the burgers. He washes the dishes, collects money, and then expands massively his restaurant. That was the most enticing gameplay sequence. Then we decided to try some camera angles because as you're not always seeing everything, but also you're not also seeing the character. And in the end, even though we tried bird's eye view, it was this sort of 45-degree angle, sort of lowered down. And as you can see, you can immediately see the character itself. So that's something also to keep in mind when you're creating characters. If they're really detailed, but your camera is high up, then you've kind of lost sort of the visual appeal of your character. So try different camera angles and sometimes different movements. So if the character is doing an action like making burgers, maybe the camera sweeps really close up to see the burgers, so you understand what the character is actually doing. Color palette. All right, so this is kind of a big, big topic. I'm not going to go through sort of all the aspects of color palette and design. People go to school sometimes for that, but I'm going to give you some of the principles and some of the learnings. Also, you can read Kevin's article on how to create a color palette for hyper casual games. Really great read. And Coolers is a great free website that I use sometimes, and they give you really nice modern color palettes as well. And if you can see here, you can actually lock your color. So if you have like a yellow stick figure, you can lock that color and then press spacebar, and it gives you a variety of color palettes. And what will that enable you to do is to emphasize that yellow, because that's what you want to do. You want to make sure your character is like really visible, or the collectibles are really visible, and that the colors you're choosing are contrasting but emphasizing the main points of your recording or your gameplay, because that's what you want to do. You want to make it easy and enjoyable to read or view. So Attack on Giants. So this is just an example of the experiments that we ran, and they don't need to be as complicated as this. But what I want you to see is like the main character here is like red for the first, three of them. They're red, and the colors that were chosen are highlighting or emphasizing that red color. And you can, even though that character is really tiny, you can still see it on the screen. And then on the other one here, the character was blue, and it was like really nice contrasting with this like deep red. So you can run some of these experiments. These color palettes tend to do really well on iOS. I think Android tends to be with this type of color range, which is going back to primary colors. So here we have Attack on Giants. What ended up being the winning creatives was this version of the primary colors. So we have the teal, the cream, but then there's really bright red for the character. And then at 17 cents, it was the boss and the character being saturated with a sort of hue pink that was slightly more on the grayish side. Again, it emphasizes the main points of the game, which is the character and the bosses. So if you wanting to start off somewhere, I would start off with the basic primary colors and then maybe versions of that. Another thing we can change visually is collectibles. So again, it goes back to this whole idea of like keeping it clear, keeping it simple. We started with DNA double helix collectibles, and we got 41 cents CPI, which was okay, but again, we like to bring that down. So the devs then tested very visual, like these big heads, and what ended up happening is obviously it dropped because it was more visually appealing. If you look at the screenshot, you immediately understand those are three different types of monsters. Whereas, in the first one, what you're seeing are sort of three different colors of an object. You're not really sure what that is. And then you can go a little bit step further and make funny stuff. And here we added poop collectibles, which dropped down to the CPI to 24 cents. So sometimes making it absurd and really funny can help with CPIs. Again, you don't have to put these in the game, but it's good to test for CPIs. And going back to characters, you can change. You might really good thing to change the skin and test the skin. So depending on your target audience, and it always brings back to what is going to attract your viewer. Um, if this game seems like I don't know, it's going to attract older females, using Amongst Us reference is not going to work. Um, Maybe it might, maybe it not. You have to test, but generally speaking, yeah, older generation will tend to be more like references to DC Comics or Marvel or Star Wars or whatnot. I don't know. But here, when we tested like different characters, I think it was like a woman and then like a croc, and then in the end, it ended up being something that was very similar to Venom character. Ended up dropping the CPI to 36 cents. So yeah, depending on your target audience, test different skins. You never know what you what is going to be most attractive for your viewer. Another way of testing characters is changing colors. So when we talk about Dining Legend, it was yellow on yellow. So it was very hard to see the character. So even though we figured out the camera sequence and the gameplay, we thought, how can we improve and visually see the character? And when we did the test, teal and pink ended up being the most attractive, and got us the lowest CPI. So from there, we did color palette changes and changed the whole environment. So we can, again, emphasize and make higher contrast with the main character so that we can really watch and see the character. And our best creative was at 53 cents with the pink character and teal background. Again, it's not all the same in every game. For example, I've tried this combination on other games, doesn't work. It really depends on your target audience and the type of game that you play, that you have, and what makes sense. We can also change environments. So on Ground Digger, we tested several environments that we thought would make sense. Again, we're going back to simple, clear storyline, and having a cave, lava, being on the moon, or going underwater. All that kind of stuff was making sense in terms of context. Um, it didn't necessarily add anything to the CPI, but it what ended up happening is those tests were positive in the sense that we got decent CPIs, and we added it to the game. So by testing these environments, we were able to then implement them in the game, and it created variety in the game, and it helped the LTV ultimately. So don't forget, like, these tests, the learnings you get from these tests, you can also then implement them into your game or to your prototype. Yeah. So, for a final example here, just to sort of recap all the stuff that we've talked about with Garden Farm, here we have 63 cents CPI. We did a straight gameplay recording of this sort of little boy type skin character making dirt. So, very sequential type gameplay. Then for the test, we thought, okay, the camera was maybe a little too shaky and we needed a bigger surface so that it was more satisfying. You know how we talked about with Ground Digger, with the big digger, crashing into that level. So here we tried to make it more satisfying. 38 cents, not bad. Let's try different tests. So here we then tried different collectibles. And we also added juiciness. So how the collectibles are projected onto the character. And then also the tool, well, not the tools, but more of the sequence. And also the sequence was slowed down. So maybe the sequence was a little bit too fast and we couldn't, the viewer wasn't allowed to sort of have the time to comprehend what was going on in the game. Then we did further tests, which ended up being the winning creative, where we added a stick figure. We took away the context of the little boy, made a simple stickman figure, less character movement. We changed the environment, make it an island so that there was this notion that you could upgrade and have more land. And also focused more on the juiciness with tools, adding tools so that the viewer understood that there were things to acquire in order to progress in the game. So yeah, and that's our final example for the visuals.
Fantastic, and yeah, I'm famous. You quoted one of my articles in your thing there on the color palette, so I appreciate that. Okay, so a lot to take in again. We'll definitely flick back to a couple of those slides if that's okay. The color palette is super interesting to me, and I think the golden rule here is typically high contrast. And it was great to see. I forget the name of the game. If you could just flick back to the Spider-Man game, I always forget the name of that one. Apologies for that. Let's have a look.
This
Not no,
this
not
line
this one. It's this one here. That one there. No, the next one. Sorry.
was.
Just wanted to get my name on the screen there again. Attack on Giants. That's it. So yeah, I think this one here with the high contrast of the pink and the yellow on
Mm.
the right there is really obvious that and the key thing that you said for me was to focus in on the main gameplay without make sure that nothing's distracting around from the core game there. And you can really see, even though that dude is really tiny that he's circled in the middle there, you can still see him, and obviously the big giants are really prominent against that pink. So I really like the idea of the color palettes being really clever, in really thinking cleverly about how you can just do a different variation of colors to the uh, try the test and see what makes a difference. I just want to real quick hit a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Moonjump Games is asking for the game jam. Will we get feedback of which of our creatives worked and which didn't? CPI for each one. Yes, you will. That will be logged in HomaLab. So against each of your video that you submit, you'll get the CPI of that. And BBO B Boy Lawson asks, "Hello guys, if Garden Farm had a 23-cent CPI, how come it didn't become a hit game?" Ooh, well, I would argue that it did pretty well. Um,
um CPIs
just
ads, they
one,
help.
yeah.
Yeah, they help publish a game. It's not There's more to that than just there's more than just ads. The game's got to do well, LTVs has got to do well. It depends on the context. Were there many games that were similar that were just better? There's lots of different elements
Yeah, I
to
think that's
making a
absolutely
successful
right,
game.
and just to absolutely repeat and reiterate what you just said. I mean, there's many different KPIs that we're looking at, and just because you have a thing with ridiculously low CPI, the LTV could be useless, and therefore it's not a profitable game. So if you've got a 10-cent CPI, but your game's only generating 9, you're not going to make any money. Um, so yeah, I think thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. If you've got more, we will answer as much as we can. The other slide, if I could go on to, if you just, I'm just going to flip back to that. If you could just go back for me on maybe the next one, was it? I can't remember. Yeah, this one. Sorry. So I thought this was really fun, and I'm really glad you included this one because it's the fun element that I think is really interesting for me, and it's kind of more. I don't know if I'm right. I'm going to put myself out on a limb. It's like more TikToky, more fun, and it really depends on the type of game and that you're doing. But typically speaking, the more I'm going to say it, the more relatable again with the big monster heads. There's no surprise to me that that dropped the CPI because the DNA things or whatever they are on the left there, they're kind of a little bit hard to understand. And I think it's real fun that you added the monster heads that then clearly reduced it by 25% almost. And then from adding the poop, which is funny, and I really like the fact that it's steaming, however gross that is. I think it's testament to the idea behind that it dropped it so low again. And I think you need to be. Is there any right now, just to give some
Mhm.
secrets away, is there anything that you're seeing work in particularly well in terms of models, or is that a stupid question? Really, does it just depend? And um,
Um, I mean, it depends on the network. TikTok, obviously, the more absurd, actually, sometimes the more sarcastic something is, and sort of has that double meaning, the funnier it is, and that works really great on TikTok. But it doesn't always work, like on idle arcade games. It doesn't tend to work. Like on Dining Legend, I had tried some animations where he had so many plates he ends up falling, and I had used that sort of oh no, oh no, oh no, music, and it didn't work. So
Right.
sometimes being funny and obvious doesn't always work. But I think for runner games, it depends on your target audience and your social network. But yes, funny does work. I mean, it really worked for Monster Egg when we had different intros of him pooping an egg almost.
Sure.
um, yeah. Yeah, I think there's no secret sort of source, or it really depends on the game. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was an awkward question, I know, but I thought, why
Yeah.
not? Might as well. You never know, right? So I think the what's funny really is that we just test stuff, and that's the whole point. We just test everything, and we never know exactly what's going to work. And clearly, for me, I'm pretty useless at guessing which one. There's some guess the CPI. Like, I always get the wrong one because I always think the other one should do better, but it's the other one, and that's exactly why we run so many tests now. I'm gonna have to ask you about the last slide or the second to last slide about the ground digger because I found that pretty interesting in terms of what you were saying. So, if we could just flick back real quick to the ground digger one with the different environments, and you
Hmm.
were saying here that, am I right in understanding you correctly that these backgrounds were not in the game and were done by you and your team before putting them in the game. So this is the creative team trying out different environments on the adverts that weren't actually in the game. Is that correct?
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah. We have.
that's amazing. So what can you talk? I mean, how do you do that? I mean, is it masking and stuff like that, or how do
Oh no.
you?
So the creative team has a couple of creative, wonderful devs that work on games, each one of our games, and if we see games working, they'll definitely work on it. And any kind of ideas, or we brainstorm together. Um, so, for example, Investment Run, we added environments to that one, and if they work, we tell the studio, and then they implement it. And this was the same kind of process here because we were doing a lot of the same recordings, and yeah, we just thought maybe changing the environments would help. It didn't necessarily give us better CPIs, but it definitely gave us sort of decent results. And then yeah, we told the devs, and they implemented it in the game, and it was really cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, what's really interesting, and I want to reiterate this for people who, this is one of the value adds that Homer adds. I mean, there's a Unity guy working directly with the creative team to take your project and chuck new stuff in it to test ads. And by doing that, as Katia said, it didn't necessarily increase any KPIs massively, but knew they were successful, and the people or the viewers liked them and they implemented them in the game. And I think that's amazing. I've never really heard of that before. I've got to be honest. I didn't know what wizardry you were using there, but it's super interesting and
Well,
it's really
because
smart.
the advantage is like the creative team is like we get to test things without, because I mean implementing anything in a game takes a lot of time and effort. So if we can sort of make recordings, sometimes they're fake, completely fake backgrounds and stuff like that, we test them, and then we communicate. We're like, hey, this really worked on the viewers and converted like this many viewers into players. If you want to put it in the game, like I would highly recommend it. So, and that's part of our role as creatives at Homa.
Sure, sure. But I just think it's really worth, this is the level that we go to here. And I think it needs to be said because I'm not sure everybody understands how much data is actually tested and the work that goes into making these hits, right? There's a couple of questions just come in from B Boy Lawson again. Is it okay to use Spider Man character in the ads? And has Marvel ever had an issue with that?
So I'm going to go through the do's and don'ts, and part of that is IP. No intellectual property characters are allowed.
Okay, so
So
wait a minute, we're coming into that. And is poop also used in the app or just in the creative?
just in the creatives.
There you go. So you didn't as a dev you didn't have to do anything, but it's Katia and her team's job to make those CPI videos perform as best as they can. So you're doing nothing, and the team here is working on your behalf to get that CPI low and successful games for you. All right, I'm going to pass back to you now, Katia, if that's okay, and let's see the next part.
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, the do's and don'ts. This section is going to be really quick. So obviously, don't show blood. Basically, the don'ts aspect of this part is because your ads will get rejected. And to answer sort of that question, like, no, we haven't had Marvel. If we've have used a character or has been used a character, Marvel hasn't actually attacked. Not that I know of in any examples in the industry. I think there might have been one or two, but anyway, um, but just avoid it. Avoid getting your ad rejected because that's a test that you've wasted essentially. No blood. So anything that actually has the color red will get rejected. And that goes back also to if you're harming a humanoid type character. So something that's very human type, and you're like Attack on the Giants, we had a lot of issues with ads getting rejected because the giants were kind of humanoids. We had to sort of manipulate them so they weren't so human-like form, and we had to remove all the blood. We first tested like different colored blood, so pink, yellow, red. Obviously, sorry, not red, blue or green. That worked for a little bit, and then they got rejected, and then we ended up doing particles. So there's different creative ways of getting around that. But yeah, that's you can invent new sort of types of bleeds if you want. No nudity and no profanity. I think that's pretty obvious. Some do's, some highly like recommended stuff I would recommend is sound design. Adding sound effects is an absolute must on your not only on your game but on your tests, and you can test different types of sound, um including ambient sound. So if your environment is water based and you have this sort of background of the ocean, it helps the viewer project themselves in the environment. Again, keeping it clear, simple, and really easy to understand. Um, then we have render settings. Oh my god, I could not express this enough. When you're making creatives, like I understand for prototypes, you're trying to make the game itself small in terms of space, but when you're rendering for creatives, up the high quality on the shadows, on the geometry, and really create beautiful recordings. We have seen over the past year, it really does make a difference on the CPI. Format requirements. So here we're going more into the specifics. So your ad will be tested on Facebook. So they have specific requirements for size. It's 1,000 pixels by 800 pixels. It has to be a .mp4 file, 30 frames per second. And again, render high quality. It really does matter. Can't emphasize this enough. We recommend 15 to 30 seconds, no longer than 30 seconds. I would say if you want the ideal, it's around 20 seconds. Again, it depends on your game. It depends what you're trying to illustrate. It depends your gameplay. If in 15 seconds it's over, but it's really tantalizing, it's visually impactful, then it's 15 seconds. It's not a problem. Last slide. Be creative. Have fun with it. What does it mean, be creative? So yeah, we kind of you say that quite a lot. So I'm just going to give you through a work through of like what that actually means. So of course the subject is blast from the past. So you're going to take a game and you're going to sort of analyze and inspire from an old game. Pick elements and features that really that you think worked. If it's Candy Crush, like what was it about that game that you really liked? Was it the color palette? Was it the candy? Was it the actual mechanics? Then you're going to add new features. So a way you can do that is a brainstorm. Pick your favorite object, and then explore how those two could fit together. So, for example, you like the color palette of Candy Crush, but you're a huge fan of Star Wars. Okay, so how can you brainstorm and come up with an idea to put that together. Then you're going to experiment, right? That's the whole point of like doing these creative tests is you experiment, see if you can come up with a fresh perspective, a fresh way of looking at things, and test. Take a 5-second clip of your gameplay or take a screenshot. I like to take screenshots, like 3 screenshots, and give it to someone who's like never seen the game or who doesn't even play games, and ask them if they understand the context. Do they understand what the objective is? That's a really great way of understanding whether what you've come up with makes sense. Because again, our target audience, I know we talk about target audience like being specific, but also when we're talking about hyper casual games, the audience is quite general. It is everyone. So the more simple, the more clear something is, the more viewers you're going to get that are going to click that download button. So, and that's it from me.
Amazing, awesome, and I think I really like that last slide. Be creative, and I think the do's and don'ts. I think a lot of the time, I think you said it as well. It's kind of obvious a lot. Like you should really know what you should and shouldn't do. I didn't know about the color red. I gotta be honest. I didn't realize it was so brutal as that. And the humanoid. When you said it, it's like don't kill a humanoid person or your character or whatever. It's like yeah, of course. That's they're not going to like that. But I um, never really thought of it quite like that. And I think it must have been interesting to come up with a humanoid type character that would get through. I can imagine that took a lot of trial and effort. Um, we got some questions coming in. I like the creative side of things as well. Can you just go back to that last slide for me? Because I'm a potato and I can't remember anything. I just want to make sure that we pause on that slide a little bit because I think when you mentioned the blast from the past, like reinventing stuff, think of what you liked from that first game and try and encapsulate that, and also the new perspectives. And I didn't even mention the camera angles before, which I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm such a geek on camera angles because I think it can make so much such a difference when we change camera angles, and it's quite easy to do. But yeah, I think someone should take a screenshot of that. We'll make the slides available a later date. But take a screenshot of this. So make sure that you are doing these things. It's really important that yeah, that's really great. Thanks for all that information, and forget about it. No, you need to be doing these things because essentially it's gonna make the difference. And I really like the fresh perspective there. So, a couple of questions that's come in. Thank you, Katia. That was amazing. I really enjoyed that, and I certainly learned a lot today. And thank you for quoting me in it. I'm so proud of that. It's ridiculous. Okay, so this is from Classified 006. Should we include similar looking characters related to recent hot topics that's not in the actual game for the creatives? That's a good question.
Ooh, okay. So if I understand correctly, like for example, Amber and Johnny Depp are recent characters on the thing. If you're asking whether we should include them in the
Yeah,
creatives,
my take on that is should we add like memes or trending stuff to entice people in even though they're not in the game? So anything in pop culture that's like hot right now, could we add an element of that into the video creative even though it's not in the game?
um, I would say yes, but does it make sense? So in Monster Egg, if I included Johnny Depp, which I tested, didn't work because the
Right.
context doesn't make any sense. Um, I think again, it goes back to that sort of creativity. You're taking something that is well known, you're putting a new idea, which is your game. Can I make those connections? Does it make sense? I think that's where you got to experiment and see. Um, but yeah, I think for your prototypes, when we're first testing, I would not recommend having pop culture because you're not sure if the pop culture references is what's making that ad or whether it's the gameplay that's actually making that ad. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to find your best gameplay and and the visually how it looks because that's what's going to carry your game for months. Because a pop culture reference that is great today and not good tomorrow will not carry your game for the next 3 months in terms of marketing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a fantastic answer because yeah, we talked a lot about trying to weave it in and faking some stuff, but for the prototypes here, you need that. Are people engaged with the core gameplay, and then leave it to Katia and her team of experts to think about all this stuff and pull on that vast experience and stuff that they've done before to know whether or not it will work or not. So for the jam especially, but generally for prototypes all over, just concentrate on that core mechanic and showing off the game as it can, and these sort of extras can like keep it going as it were. Improve the longevity of the game where they can keep remarketing it using memes and stuff like that.
Mm.
This is a great question from SYNK. What about creators for simple puzzle games like Color Roll 3D, Paper Fold, Tangled, etc.? There are no
Mhm.
collectibles usually, and very little room to change the camera angles. What things can we try?
Um, well, subjects. I know for those like the paper fold one, it was changing the actual image of what is the final result. You can add effects, sound effects. Um, you can change the color palette. Um, you can change the editing. We didn't talk about editing, unfortunately, but that's also something you can put together. We briefly touched on it when I talked about the ground digger sequence, where you see you cut from the upgrade straight to him digging or it digging. Sorry. So there are ways of making recordings more interesting without necessarily going and changing the gameplay if you want.
Yeah, I think
With those,
it's a difficult question to answer that, and it's a good question. I think the color thing is quite an interesting one to try. My gut feel like color roll, paper fold, yeah, tangled. Yeah, you could try different, depending on what the actual puzzle is, where you've got that static camera kind of thing. Try some different models or something like that potentially. Um,
well, I mean, really, there's actually quite a lot of tests you could do. Like, how many moves before you fail? Is it a fail one? Is it a win situation? Is it two moves and then you fail, or is it three moves or four moves? There's all those types of like actual gameplay testing before going into the whole visual aspect of things. Obviously, those types of games like the paper fold, the subject really matters. Like if I think the West one was like the most popular, that's going to affect majorly the CPI. But yeah, whether it fails or reward is definitely one I would think about for puzzle games.
Yeah, and that is why we have got the expert here today. Thank you, Katie. That is the winning answer, I think you'll find. Look at this one where you're restricted on the stuff that you've got with that static camera, and or some of that doesn't apply. The sequence and the fails, how quickly do you fail? Do you win straight away? How complicated is the puzzle on this one? Do you keep doing that one where you keep getting it wrong and you just think, oh my goodness, can someone just please let me download this and do that level for you? So think about that, and you can rewind the video or rewatch it or whatever, and look at some of the examples Katie gave earlier on and focus in on that where you're restricted and you can't do the other things that we were talking about. Great answer. Ali MV said, we can only upload 4 videos on the panel. How can we test more? Ali, I'm not sure about that one. I will get back to you on that. I thought you could do at least 6 for the jam, but I honestly, full transparency, I don't know how to answer that. So leave that one with me. I will answer that over on the Discord. Panos is asking, should the camera angles be the same as during gameplay, or should we have special camera angles for the creatives?
Special camera angles for the creatives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if you were to rewind a little bit, and I don't want to answer for you too much, Katia, but Katia kind of covered that a little bit earlier where they tried different angles for the creative only, but I think I understood that correctly.
Yeah, I think for the game, the sort of what we talk about, the default camera, which is behind, where you can sort of see a scene. That is sort of the default camera angle, and that's what we're used to seeing on all the games. You can change the camera angle in the gameplay, but I think that's something you test out really later on. But for creatives, the reason why we change the camera angle is because you can see things differently. So, for example, on the default camera, you might not want to see the fact that you can explore all this like surroundings. You want to focus and hone in on your main character and what he's doing currently in that 1 second, which is picking up burgers, for example. You don't need to see the kitchen and the other restaurant in the background because that deters away from the simple, clear storyline, which is what we're trying to say is this character is picking up burgers and serving them.
Yeah, agree. You know, the camera angle in your game should be the most appropriate for your game and be most fun, right? The interesting part of all of that is that by changing the camera in like on the one that Katie said when they zoomed in a bit, what was really good was that you really understood and the graphics were really good. So zooming out, you lost the powerful graphics that they put in there, and that was a kind of a little bit of a selling point for me because they were such high quality. And just
Mm,
before we move on to the next question, I
mhm.
think it's super important to remember chuck that render quality up so those you haven't got those janky shadows that are really ugly. And that is really important when you're thinking about doing your videos. Get your render settings high up. You know, I'd be spending half a day on this and like trying all sorts of different things. And I really think you should put energy into this and not ignore what's you've been told what to do today. So there's no excuse, I'm afraid, everybody. Um, Classified 006. Thanks for the great answers. You're very welcome. I'm glad we could help. Do we focus on exact gameplay or add some story to give the creative? Let me say that again. English is hard. Do we do we? Oh my goodness. Do we focus on exact gameplay or add some story to give the creatives some context?
I think where we are in terms of prototyping, creating storylines, and I did briefly touch on this when we made intros, is like it's something that you kind of do afterwards. Because I think it takes a lot of time, and you want to make sure that your game is sustainable and that you've got interesting gameplay. I think how we can manipulate a recording, which is edits, speed, um, and all the in-game stuff with camera angles and stuff like that. I think you can make a gameplay recording and manipulate it so that it makes a storyline. Um, and if we go back to you wanting to show progression, character does an action and then there's a progression or a fail, which was one of the options. If your game isn't doing that and you can't record that, then maybe is more of an issue with the game and less with making creatives that follow that.
Yeah, I think that's a really well put. And like, if you're struggling with trying to get the storyline across on your gameplay video, maybe your game's lacking somewhere.
Mm.
In terms of, it's a tricky one this because we are talking a little bit more in further along in the process for some of this stuff where what we do here at Homa. But for your prototypes, you want to concentrate mostly on the gameplay, and I would play around with some camera angles and stuff just to try and get a different take of it, and always focus in on what's most interesting part of your game, what's the most fun, or what's the most exciting, or what's the most sort of epic, I would say. Um, One last question, then we're going to start to wrap this up because we have kept Katia way longer than I said we would. Should we change the camera angle of the game we set? Oh, we just kind of answered this one from Panos, but I'll read it out anyway. Should we change the camera angle of the game itself if we find out that a specific camera angle is doing better than others in the creatives? Oh, I see. So it is slightly different. So the question is, if we have a creative with a particular camera angle, should we change the game to match?
I think for because I don't handle the actual game itself and those types of decisions, I would say a PM would end up doing an A/B test on that, but that would be further down the line. I
Yeah.
think if I think you can if you're let's say this is your character and you've put your camera sort of a bird's eye, but you've done some tests and you realize that you have to be further down or slightly, like maybe that might help your game. Again, uh, you've already got the player. I don't. and we don't have those types of results in creatives to see whether that's actually affecting the game and the LTV of or that player. What the
Yeah, no,
viewer
that
is seeing is yeah, it's different.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment. And the only thing I would say is like, yeah, that's slightly outside of the scope of what we're talking about today. It's kind of risky, and that's kind of it
Mm.
sort of touches into the end testing we would do here, where we serve up different versions of the games for the players. So one person would get game A with the original camera angle, another person would get game B with an alternative camera angle. I would say if you found a camera angle that you like, try and like weave in a bonus level or something with that different camera angle, which changes up your game in a relatively cheap way. All right, so we are going to start to wrap that up today. If we only have 4 to 6, Flowbell has come in on the end there. If we only have 4 or 6 videos to work with, what would be your number one thing to test? That is a great answer, a great question
Question.
to
A
finish with
great question.
today.
Um, so I would definitely focus on okay, when it comes to full videos, you're not going to be able to test like different color palettes or camera angles because when we talk about visual testing, we've already figured out what gameplay is working. So I would focus in on gameplay, what and how we can fit storylines around that gameplay. So maybe you might have a character that collects, you might have a character that kills, you might have a character in the same game that and then upgrade. I would try to test and remember the 3 second rule is in the first 3 seconds, what are we first seeing that is the most attractive? Is it the upgrade? Is it the killing? Or is it something else? You focus in on those different aspects of your game and then build storyline around that. Like, how do we get there? I think that's the best way to construct your, if you only have four videos to test, because you're trying to test what is the most satisfying part of your game in terms of gameplay.
There you go. Smashed it. Yeah, exactly. Right. So think about what's the most exciting what's the showstopper part of your game? Be sure to include that. And I like the idea of starting on a fail and then repeating and starting the gameplay from the beginning as well, because you see those two the win lose state straight away gives high impact on some sort of death with some particles that Katia touched on quite a bit earlier. So yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. If you're struggling to think what is the most exciting part of my game, your game probably needs something more exciting if you can't
Yeah.
think of the video to match, because that's what you're doing. You're making this video, and if you don't have something epic or don't have something hooky or don't have something exciting or unusual, then you probably need to rethink your game a little bit and try and see how can I weave something in that will make this more interesting. All right, that is going to go and wrap it up. So thank you everybody in the chat for joining with us today. Great questions. Um, don't forget that we are going to be back on when are we back? We are back tomorrow. We are back tomorrow, and we will have some more games for you to go through there. But Katia, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining with us today. It's been such a great presentation. I've really enjoyed it. So much value. You want to go back and watch this, and so much value, Bomb. So say thank you in the chat there, and be sure to come and join us over on Discord, where you can get answers to all your questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today. And also, you can see a link over on the Discord from me to book a 15-minute slot where we can go and have a look at your game. Maybe we can have a look at one of your game videos and see how that stacks up. I will try and help as much as possible. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Katia.
Thank
You've been a
you.
legend today.
Thank
Thanks a
you for
lot.
having me.
See you later, guys.